helping them to cope with the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. But more can and must be done. To that end, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has already expanded the family route. She has also confirmed that from tomorrow, Ukrainians with passports will be able to apply for UK visas entirely online, without having to visit visa application centres. As a result, the number of Ukrainians now arriving in this country is rapidly increasing, and numbers will grow even faster from tomorrow. We also know, however, that the unfailingly compassionate British public want to help further, which is why, Mr. Speaker, today we are answering that call with the announcement of a new sponsorship scheme, Homes for Ukraine. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, officials in the Home Office, in my own department and across government for their work over the course of the last days and weeks in order to ensure that we can stand up this scheme as quickly as possible. And in particular, I would like to thank my honourable friend, Richard Harrington, now Lord Harrington of Watford. His experience in ensuring that the Syrian refugee resettlement programme was a success will prove invaluable in making sure that we do right by the people of Ukraine. The scheme that he has helped us to design draws on the enormous goodwill and generosity of the British public and our proud history of supporting the vulnerable in their hour of greatest need. The scheme will allow Ukrainians with no family ties to the UK to be sponsored by individuals or organisations who can offer them a home. There will be no limit to the number of Ukrainians who can benefit from this scheme. The scheme will be open to all Ukrainian nationals and residents. They will be able to live and work in the United Kingdom for up to 3 years. They will have full and unrestricted access to benefits, healthcare, employment and other support. Sponsors in the UK can be of any nationality with any immigration status, provided they have at least 6 months leave to remain within the UK. Sponsors will have to provide accommodation for a minimum of 6 months, and in recognition of their generosity, the government will provide a monthly payment of £350 to sponsors for each family whom they look after. These payments will be tax-free, they will not affect benefit entitlement nor council tax status. Ukrainians arriving in the United Kingdom will also have access to the full range of public services, doctors, schools and full local authority support. Of course, we want to minimise bureaucracy and make the process as straightforward as possible, while also doing everything we can to ensure the safety of all involved. Sponsors will therefore be required to undergo necessary vetting checks, and we're also streamlining processes to security assess the status of all Ukrainians who will be arriving in the United Kingdom. From today, anyone who wishes to record their interest in sponsorship can do so on gov.uk, and the webpage has gone live as I speak. We will then send any individual who registers further information setting out the next steps in this process. We'll outline what is required of a sponsor, and we will set out how sponsors can identify a named Ukrainian individual or family who can then take up each sponsorship offer. Because we want the scheme to be up and running as soon as possible, Homes for Ukraine will initially facilitate sponsorship between people with known connections, but we will rapidly expand the scheme in a phased way with charities, churches and community groups to ensure that many more prospective sponsors can be matched with Ukrainians who need help. And we are, of course, also working closely with the devolved administrations to make sure that their kind offers of help are also mobilised. I know that all concerned want to play their part in supporting Ukrainians who've been through so much to ensure they feel at home in the United Kingdom. I'm committed to working with everyone of goodwill to achieve this. Mr. Speaker, our country has a long and proud history of supporting the most vulnerable during their darkest hours. We took in refugees fleeing Hitler's Germany, those fleeing repression in Idi Amin's Uganda, and of course those who fled the atrocities of the Balkan Wars. More recently, we've offered support to those fleeing persecution in Syria, Afghanistan and Hong Kong, and we're doing so again with Homes for Ukraine. We're a proud democracy. All of us in this House wish to see us defend and uphold our values, and to stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies, and to offer a safe haven to people who have been forced to flee war and persecution. The British people have already opened their hearts in so many ways, and I'm hopeful that many will also be ready to open their homes and to help those fleeing persecution find peace, healing, and the prospect of a brighter future. And that is why I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to Shadow Secretary of State, Lisa Nandy.
Mr Speaker, we were so relieved to hear the Secretary of State was going to announce a scheme to allow Ukrainian refugees a route to safety after weeks of delay. But a press release is not a plan. And we are really deeply concerned about the lack of urgency. He went on TV yesterday to claim that Ukrainians could be here by Sunday, but he's just told us that they will still need a visa under the current application process. These are 50-page forms that have to be completed online, asking people who have fled with nothing to find an internet cafe to upload documents they don't have, water bills, mortgage documents to prove who they are. The Home Office has been incredibly slow in issuing these visas. As of this morning, only 4,000 have been issued. We are lagging way behind the generosity of other countries. We could simplify this process today. We could keep essential checks, but drop the excessive bureaucracy. He knows it. Why hasn't it been done? For weeks, the British people have been coming forward in large numbers to offer help. It's been moving, heartwarming to see the decency and spirit on display in every corner of this country. But can he clarify what exactly the government will be doing, especially in relation to matching families to sponsors? Because on his tour of the TV studios, he suggested several times that people who are willing to sponsor a Ukrainian family need to come to the government with the name of that family, who will then rubber stamp it. He can't seriously be asking Ukrainian families who are fleeing Vladimir Putin, who've left their homes with nothing, to get onto Instagram and advertise themselves in the hope that a British family might notice them. Is this genuinely the extent of this scheme? Surely there's a role for the Secretary of State in matching Ukrainian families to their sponsors, not just a DIY asylum scheme where all he does is take the credit. Can he please clarify what the government's role is going to be? There's been a lack of urgency to get people here, and there's still a lack of urgency to ensure we support them when they do. My honourable friend and I spoke with council leaders earlier today. They stand ready and willing to help. Why hasn't anyone from his department picked the phone up to them? I spoke to charities last week who he will ask to act as sponsors. They are acutely aware that the people who are coming will be quite unlike previous refugees. 2 million people are on the march, children alone, mums with very young kids, older people. The brutal reality of what's happening in Ukraine is that working-age people have stayed behind to fight. Now, they will have healthcare needs. They'll need school places, maternity care, social care. One council leader told me today that his city, which traditionally plays a major role in welcoming refugees, has only 9 secondary school places available. Has it not occurred to him until this point to pick up the phone to leaders like him before he went into the TV studios and promised the earth? These charities and council leaders are the same people who stepped up during COVID. They spin gold out of thread every single day, and what is keeping them awake at night right now is how we do right by people and keep them safe. It was only a few months ago that the Home Office placed a child into a hotel in Sheffield that they had been told was unsafe, without even bothering to tell the council, and he fell out of a window and died. Will he ensure that every council is contacted by close of play today? Will he work with them to do the vetting checks that are needed? They're experts in safeguarding children. Will he not just trust them, but support them? Will he put a safety net in place in case a placement breaks down? His department over the weekend confirmed that families who are left homeless in that situation will not be able to claim for housing costs under universal credit. Surely that can't be true. Surely we are not going to ask people who fled bombs and bullets to lie homeless on the streets of Britain. I suspect, Mr Speaker, he has felt as ashamed as I have to watch how this government has closed the door to people who need our help. People have been, he shakes his head, people have been turned back at Calais. They've been left freezing by the roadside with their children. We've had planes leaving neighbouring NATO countries packed to the rafters, except those to London, because this government has turned people away. The British people who've come forward have shown that we are a far better country than their government. But unless he gets a plan together, a real plan, not just a press release, all he is effectively announcing is plans to fail the people of Ukraine twice over. He said today that they have our total admiration, and they do. But they need more than that. They need our total support.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her questions and what I think was her support for our scheme. The Honourable Lady asked about the visa application process and the length and the bureaucracy associated with it. Well, as was announced last week in the House of Commons by the Home Secretary, and as I repeated today, it is the case that for Ukrainians who have a valid passport, it will be the case that they can be, have their application turned round within 24 hours, not in the way to which you referred. That was announced last week. It is time that instead of manufacturing synthetic outrage, she actually kept up with what government and my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is delivering. She asked about matching. She's already had a go. She asked about matching families and sponsors. We are moving as quickly as possible in order to ensure, working with NGOs and local government, that individuals in need can be found, the families and the sponsors whom they need, in order to get people into this country as quickly as possible. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for speaking to people in local government this morning. I was speaking to people in local government 10 days ago in order to ensure that this scheme was capable of being delivered. She asks why it is that we are requiring matching in the way that we are. It's because our scheme has been developed in partnership with non-governmental organisations who have welcomed our approach. We've been doing the practical work of ensuring that refugee organisations on the ground can help to shape our response in order to help those most in need. Now, I know that the Honourable Lady wants to help. I believe that everyone in this House wants to ensure that the scheme is successful. So she makes a number of valid points about the need for school places. That is why there is additional funding available to every local authority that will take refugees in order to ensure that school places are provided. She asks about wraparound care. We're providing additional funding to local government in order to ensure that the expertise required in order to provide those who've been traumatised with the support they need will also be there. She asks about the rapidity with which vetting checks, but also the comprehensive nature of those vetting checks, can be guaranteed. We've been working with the Home Office in order to streamline that process so it is quickly as possible, but also to ensure, as she quite rightly pointed out, that we do not place vulnerable children in accommodation where they might be at risk. In all of these cases, every single one of the points that she has made has been addressed by officials, NGOs and those in local government in order to make sure that our scheme works. It now falls to the Honourable Lady, her questions having been answered, to get behind this scheme, to support those open-hearted British people who want to ensure that we can do everything possible in order to help those in need. It is time to rise above partisan politics and to recognise that this is a united effort in which our colleagues in devolved administrations and those in NGOs are working with the government to put humanity first.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has generated a great deal of progress in the last few days, but he'll understand that we still have a very long way to go. I don't want to bore the House or you, Mr. Speaker, with the experiences that I had in France last weekend, but I learnt a lot from them. I'd be very grateful because we need a meet and greet system, and there are other things that we need to put in place very quickly indeed if this is going to work. So would my right honourable friend or Lord Harrington meet with me either today or tomorrow to make sure that we can avoid some of the elephant traps that face us if we don't get this right?
Yes, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend who, over the course of the last 10 days, has been in touch with me daily in order to outline offers of help from his constituents and others, a model constituency MP and a humanitarian. And Lord Harrington will meet my honourable friend tomorrow in order to make sure that we can operationalise those offers of help.
We come to SNP spokesperson Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I start also by thanking people across the UK who have come forward with incredibly generous offers of accommodation and support for Ukrainians. And of course, we will do whatever we can to support this initiative. But we do very much regret that it is only phase 1 today. Things are still not going fast enough. And we will also continue to argue that the best response available to the government is to stop asking Ukrainians to apply for visas altogether. On that point, why are people accepted onto this scheme still going to have to apply for a visa as well? Yes, of course, some of these people may be able to apply online, but an online process is not necessarily a fast process either. On sponsorship, we welcome that people with limited leave to remain will now be able to be sponsors, but when does he anticipate that charities, churches and community groups can also play their part? He explained a little bit about the vetting processes, but how will sponsors be supported to undertake their role? And that's not just a question of cash. And what happens if a sponsorship does not work out? What move-on support will be available? On financial support, Mr Speaker, will the £350 per month be available to sponsors such as community groups as well as to individuals? Does access to public funds mean full access, including the housing element of universal credit? And is there £10,000 local authority support per person, as was reported in the press? And what about the most vulnerable people, the orphans, the very elderly and the others who will never know about this scheme's existence, never mind how to apply? Can, for example, UNHCR refer someone onto this scheme or for resettlement? And what support would be provided in those circumstances? And finally, Mr Speaker, what discussions has he had with the Scottish and Welsh governments about their request to operate as super sponsors, and will he endeavour to make that work?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his questions, and I thank him for his support for the scheme. He makes the point about making sure that we can speed up all of the security and visa checks as quickly as possible. Well, as I mentioned earlier, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has already acted in that regard. It is the case that from tomorrow, anyone with a Ukrainian passport will be able to apply online and should, thanks to a surge in the number of caseworkers in the Home Office, be able to have permission very quickly granted, turned round, a PDF will be sent straight to them. They can then fly into this country to a warm welcome. And it is the case as a result of that, that in our visa application centres, the surge of staff there will be able to deal with those individuals who, for whatever reason, do not have a passport or the capacity to secure one quickly, and that means that we can more quickly process the number of Ukrainians who wish to come here. As was pointed out earlier, 4,000 visas have been granted. The numbers are due to surge during the course of this week. He makes the point that charities, churches and community groups have all stepped up. We want to ensure that we are working with all of them during the course of this week in order to facilitate their role, not just in matching individual sponsors and Ukrainians who might benefit, but also extending the reach of support that we give, so it's not just a roof over someone's head, it is also the valuable interpersonal support of which so many are capable. And I had the opportunity when I was chatting to faith groups earlier today to talk not just to representatives of the Ukrainian churches, but also the Church of England, the Church of Scotland, and the Roman Catholic Church, including the Roman Catholic bishops in Scotland, all of whom are anxious to ensure that we do everything that we can to help. We will ensure that for those individuals who, for whatever reason, may find that a sponsorship solution doesn't work for them, that the local government partners with whom we're working and the charity partners with whom we're working receive the resource they require. The £350 is there for individuals, but charities and community groups will have a vital role to play in helping to marshal individual offers. He makes the point about those unaccompanied minors, orphans and others who need our support. We're working with those on the ground in order to ensure that we can have the right solution for them. And he finally asked about working with the devolved administrations. I was grateful to the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales for their generous offer to act as super sponsors, and we're doing everything we can in order to facilitate that. And my officials are working with those in the Scottish and the Welsh Government in order to ensure that we can do so in a way that enables everyone to live up to their responsibilities.
Caroline Noakes.
Speaker, I really welcome my right honourable friend's statement, and he's answered many of the questions that arose over the weekend. But can I specifically press him on when he expects phase 2 to start and what work is already going on with NGOs? They make the point that they have many people who are already DBS checked, but the volunteers coming forward from my constituency tend not to be. We know that there are already backlogs in DBS checking, so can he assure me that that will be speeded up? And a very practical question, what about somebody who is planning to move home over the course of the next 6 months? Will they still be able to take part, even if their address changes?
Three very good points. We're working this week with civil society and NGOs. Indeed, I and Lord Harrington met them in order to ensure that we can expedite phase 2 as quickly as possible, and we'll update the House in real time over the next few days. On the second point about safeguarding, we're working with the Home Office. We don't believe we need to have full DBS checks in order to make sure that someone is an appropriate sponsor. It will often be the case that very light touch criminal checks will be sufficient, and then local authorities can be supported in order to make sure that people are safe, in line with the questions from the opposition, points that she made much more sharply, of course. And then if people are moving house, something, of course, which I've had to do recently, then we will do everything possible in order to facilitate their support.
Chair of the Select Committee, Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Say to the Secretary of State, I think in principle there will be general support for a scheme that allows individuals to welcome refugees into their home. I think in principle that is certainly accepted. In terms of some details, he accepted there would be cost to local authorities, who will be key to making this work. I'm sure he accepts that. Has he agreed with the LGA, and I declare my interest as Vice President of the LGA, the costs that they're going to get to cover education and other wraparound support services? Will those costs apply to people who come over on the community sponsorship scheme and on the family scheme as well? And what about individuals who come here as family members, but the family can't actually accommodate them in their homes because of the size of the refugees who are coming over, the number involved? What we're going to do to accommodate those people? How is that accommodation going to be provided? What's the plan for that as well?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Chairman of the Select Committee for his questions. It is the case that the amount of money that we're giving to local government is based on the Afghan resettlement scheme. So the amount of money that will be given to local authorities for the early years, for primary and for secondary education matches exactly. And indeed the overall local authority tariff, I hate to use the word tariff when we're talking about human beings, but that will be exactly the same. So we're building on the arrangements that we had with the LGA, and I've been in touch with James Jemison, the leader of the LGA, as well as individual council leaders to outline the level of support. Obviously, we keep things under review in order to make sure the local government has what it needs. The second point, of course, about people who come under the family scheme, as ever, there's always been a balance between speed and comprehensiveness of an offer. The reason why the family scheme was introduced is that we knew that this could be the speediest possible scheme, but his question points to a particular challenge that we have. We still have, in hotel accommodation, around 14,000 Afghan refugees. We still have significant pressure on local authority accommodation and on housing overall. So as we look to meet our humanitarian needs, we need to be as flexible as possible, and we'll be saying more about how we can mobilise other resources, either at the state's disposal, local government's disposal, or the private sector's disposal, in order to provide additional accommodation of the kind that he mentions.
Sir John Redmond.
A 3-year visa, but only 6 months guaranteed accommodation. Will they have any tenant rights? And what is the backup provision if the sponsor wants to terminate well before the end of the visa?
Well, it's our expectation that those who commit to have someone in their home for 6 months are undertaking a quite significant commitment, but it's already the case that expressions of interest suggest that there are many, many, many people who want to do exactly that. The experience of previous sponsorship schemes has been that those who've undertaken that commitment have found it a wonderful, wonderful thing to have done, and the number of those who have dropped out or opted out has been small. But it is the case, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, that there may be occasions where relationships break down, and in those circumstances we'll be mobilising both the support of central and local government, but also civil society, in order to assure that individuals who are here can move on. Final thing that I would want to say is that many of those who come here, of course, there'll be women and children in the front line coming here, but many of those who want to come here will want to work and contribute, will want to be fully part of society. And it is the case already that we've had offers from those in the private sector who are willing to provide training and jobs to people so that they can fully integrate into society for as long as they're here.
Florence Session-Loman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to go back to the Secretary of State's point where he highlighted that over 14,000 Afghan refugees are still in hotels, including hotels in my constituency of Vauxhall. Accommodation that is frankly unsuitable for people suffering long-term trauma, people fleeing war. I wasn't quite sure what the Secretary of State response is in terms of dealing with that type of long-term unjustifiable and unsuitable accommodation.
Well, I have enormous sympathy for the Honourable Lady. One of the reasons why Lord Harrington has joined my department and is working with the Home Office is in order to ensure that we can get people whom we've accepted out of hotel accommodation, which is unsuitable for the long term, and into the community. But that requires us to ensure that those local authorities that are receiving individuals are supported in the way they are. I would be more than happy to return to this House in order to outline the steps that we're taking in order to deal with this situation. But it comes back to the essential point which the Chairman of the Select Committee brought out. As we show a warm welcome to people who are fleeing persecution, we need to ensure that that welcome can be truly stable and secure. And that means securing additional accommodation, and that means moving beyond hotels and local authorities. That's why the Homes for Ukraine scheme harnesses the kindness of civil society. But there is more that we must do, and we'll update the House in due course.
Robert Halford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome the scheme that my right honourable friend has set out. it was Sir Nicholas Winton who said, if it's not impossible, there must be a way to do it. And could I ask my right honourable friend if he would extend the scheme or the imagination that he set out today to offer a make sure that Britain harbours a refuge for Ukrainian orphans who are able to come here and to work with Ukraine to bring them over and make sure that these children are looked after.
My right honourable friend makes a characteristically compassionate and acute point, and one of the areas of greatest difficulty is helping orphans and unaccompanied children. That is something that we need to do more on and will.
Alistair Carmichael.
Mr. Speaker, this is significant and welcome progress, even if I suspect it still does leave us somewhat short of our obligations under the 1951 Convention. But can the Secretary of State explain how this sponsorship scheme will interact with the rights of those who are already here, perhaps under a work visa? If their circumstances change, how will they then be able to obtain the same level of protection that will be given to refugees coming here under his scheme?
Thursday.
Well, I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman, and of course the scheme that we're introducing today is not perfect, but we hope to work with him and others in order to make sure that it is improved as it develops. One of the things that we want to do was to stress that anyone who's got 6 months residency in the UK can act as a sponsor, but he quite rightly draws attention to the fact that there are Ukrainians in this country, some of whom, for example, are students and others of whom are here under a position where they do not have indefinite leave to remain. We will seek to regularise their status. The Home Secretary and Lord Harrington, I know, are already on it.
Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome very much the conduit for the immense generosity of the British public that my right honourable friend has set out. But as he's recognised, what a Ukrainian refugee needs is not just a home, but also the services that go with that home. And local authorities, as others have said, will be providing those. Can I ask him about the very substantial coordination challenges here? Not just between his department and the Home Office, though that's important, but also between the refugees who are already here from other places and the services that are being provided to them and those who will arrive from Ukraine, and the fact that under the scheme that he's described, where people will go is where there's a home for them, not necessarily where there is service provision for them, and he will need to ensure, will he not, that that service provision is indeed provided.
Thursday.
Well, my right honourable friend makes a very, very good point, and this is a cross-government and beyond-government effort. And as he reminds us, people who've come here from Syria, people who've come here from Afghanistan, we've welcomed in a compassionate fashion, but there are delivery challenges for everyone in government that we need to work out in order to ensure that the right services are there. We expect, but we don't predict, that many of those who will benefit in the first stages of this scheme will be people who will be moving to areas where there are already a significant number of people of Ukrainian ancestry, where some of the social networks will help. But we do need to make sure that, as the scheme expands, that the support is there.
Mike Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State said the web page to volunteer to sponsor a Ukrainian refugee has gone live. The ITV journalist Paul Brand has just reported that it doesn't work, and the site can't be reached.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his real-time update. I'm sorry if Paul Brand's internet connection is wonky. It seems as though connection for my honourable friend, the member for Rutland and Melton, is superior. She's just signed up.
Laura Forrest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome today's announcement, and I have been inundated by offers from my own constituents with rooms or homes that they would like to make available. But can I ask a prosaic question? One or two of my constituents have asked about set-up costs, things like cots, children's beds, and I was wondering what steps my right honourable friend would take, either through his department or working with local authorities, to match up individuals with charities so that that initial equipment, clothes, all the things that families will need can be arranged at the start.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I know that she's already been working with her constituents in West Berkshire in order to do everything possible to support those who may benefit from this scheme. And it is the case that the charities, church groups and others with whom I and Lord Harrington have been in conversation over the last few days are already making the sorts of connections that she's been responsible for making in order to ensure that detailed practical help can be there for those who are acting so generously.
Mary Kelly Foy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like many, I was confused by the Secretary of State's suggestion that sponsors could match with refugees using Twitter and Instagram, which has raised a number of safeguarding concerns given the trauma that many of those people will have been exposed to. So can the Secretary of State confirm if refugees will have access to specialist support and that support that they need, and how will they be protected from exploitation in the UK?
Here, Secretary of State.
They absolutely will have access to that support. Anyone who acts as a sponsor will face light-touched vetting checks initially, and then subsequently will be visited by those from local government who, to be fair, the Honourable Lady quite rightly pointed out, are experts in safeguarding.
Damien Green.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome this announcement, and I'm grateful to the Secretary of State and the Government for listening to the voices from all sides of this House who've been urging this kind of action on them. Can I go back to the subject of local authorities, particularly lower-tier local authorities? My own council in Ashford has been very active and generous in helping refugees from Syria and Afghanistan. What should local authorities like that who want to help be doing today to plug themselves into the system?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and he and the One Nation group of Conservative MPs helped in the development of our policy with some of the ideas that they shared with the department, and I'm grateful to him and his colleagues and individuals across the House who've played a collaborative part in that. The money that we are giving to local authorities will go to lower-tier local authorities, and I will ask my department to ensure that in Ashford and elsewhere, and through the good offices of the LGA, local authorities know how to access the resources that they need.
Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government's response to the refugee crisis so far has shamed our country and damaged our reputation abroad. So today's announcement is a step forward, but we need to go faster than his statement suggests to make up for lost time. So can the Secretary of State confirm to the many groups that have contacted me in Sheffield over the weekend a date by which the community sponsorship route will be open?
Secretary of State.
Friday.
Bob Blackman.
Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend is quite right to have a light touch approach to vetting of those seeking security. Clearly, a large number of the people arriving will be vulnerable. There will be women and children. And ideally, they'll be placed with families with connections, but inevitably they'll be placed with others. So could he go further and explain who will be doing the vetting? Will it be local authorities, be done nationally, so we make sure these vulnerable people are not placed with people who may exploit them?
Absolutely. It will be a national vetting process initially, and then local authorities will follow up. As ever, we have to balance two things, and it's a point that's been made across the House. The speed with which people can be placed and the security of the setting in which they're placed. We believe that the approach that we're taking means that a light touch can ensure that we're not placing vulnerable individuals with anyone who has any record of criminality. But subsequent to that, of course, there will be additional checks in order to ensure that the quality of accommodation and the basis on which people are being housed is decent and fair.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
My local authority, Cyngor Gwynedd, has been inundated with warm-hearted offers of accommodation and support. They're concerned, however, that they're still being left in the dark. For instance, despite the announcement of a hotline for the public, Gwynedd Council have not yet been given a regional contact from this government. What will the Secretary of State do, therefore, to fix his scheme's weaknesses in communications? And what will he do to ensure that there are no breaks from here in Westminster on Wales's ambition to be a super sponsor as a nation of sanctuary for Ukrainian refugees?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and I think that in the conversations that I've had with the Welsh Government, they are anxious to ensure that they coordinate with local government in Wales and indeed civil society in order to ensure that they can provide support. On her point about the Welsh Government being a super sponsor, I discussed with Minister Jane Hutt alongside the First Minister of Scotland exactly what can be done. If more information is required by Gwynedd Council and its councillors, my department will endeavour to do so, and if there are any challenges that she faces, I hope that she'll contact me direct in order to make sure that her constituents are aware of how to help.
Dean Russell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I first welcome the appointment of Lord Harrington of Watford to his post. Yesterday, I spent time in the Peace Garden in Castlebury Park with the Watford Interfaith Association, who took prayers from many, many faiths across the area. And I know how important faith is, especially at this difficult time. So can my right honourable friend please set out the steps his department is taking to work with Ukrainian people and the religious organisations here in the UK so we can support them spiritually as well as physically?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. People of all faiths and none have stepped up in order to demonstrate their support for those fleeing persecution. In particular, I'd like to thank representatives of Ukrainian churches here in the United Kingdom, and in particular Bishop Kenneth Nowakowski, who I know has been talking to the Minister for Faith, my honourable friend, the member for Saffron Walden, and thanks to his direct intervention and her direct intervention, a number of Ukrainian-speaking priests were able to come into this country at an accelerated rate in order to ensure that we provided the pastoral care for which the Ukrainian community was so keen to see.
Tanmanjit Singh Dassi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As with previous refugee crises, the government's response to the Ukraine crisis has, quite frankly, been pathetic, revealing the true extent of the callousness within this government's hostile environment policy. And the only reason, by the way, that we're having such a statement, which in itself is wholly inadequate, is because the government has been dragged kicking and screaming by the opposition, the media and the good British people who have said that this debacle simply doesn't represent us. We are much better than this. But I want to press the Secretary of State on a case of my Slough constituents. There is a 15-year-old Ukrainian girl currently in Poland who has had to leave behind the death and destruction and her parents and her brother in Ukraine. Her only family outside of the Ukraine is in the UK. They have tried their level best to bring her here. However, the government shamefully have said that she is ineligible for the Ukraine family scheme because she isn't considered to be a close enough relation. Instead preferring for a vulnerable child to fend for herself. So, Secretary of State, what can my constituents do to bring this young girl to safety?
Just before the Secretary of State answers that question, the honourable gentleman knows that it was far too long. All we need here is questions. Everybody knows the background. Can I just say that? Everybody knows the background. We don't need every member who stands up to explain the background. Just ask the question because we've got an awful lot to get through today, and this is very important. Secretary of State.
Thank you. On the individual case, it is true that there are every day in Portcullis House Home Office officials working incredibly hard to deal with individual surgery cases of the kind he mentions. I would urge him to visit the caseworkers there. If for any reason that's inadequate, just email me direct and we'll do everything we can. He secondly says that there's more that the scheme needs to do in order to be better. It is always the case that more needs to be done at every point when we are dealing with a humanitarian tragedy. We all recognise that, but I would respectfully say to him two things. Look, this country has taken in people from Syria, from Afghanistan. We're taking in people from Ukraine. It is an uncapped scheme. We're going to disagree politically and all the rest of it, but I'm just had it up to here with people trying to suggest that this country is not generous. And all this stuff about hostile environment, the hostile environment was invented under a Labour Home Secretary. So can we just chuck it when it comes to the partisan nonsense and get on with delivery?
Tim Lawton.
Me? Oh. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I applaud the generosity of this scheme, and it is a shame the opposition has been on a scavenger hunt for the negatives in a very churlish way. Can I ask two practical questions? There are some people who don't have accommodation free for the whole of the year, when they've got students who've gone off to university, for example. Will there be a scheme whereby there can be shared responsibility to take on family members? And secondly, for businesses who want to sponsor work placements, I have many in the hospitality industry in Worthing who want to bring in chefs and things like that. How will they go about that? Because it needs to be done locally, because it's no good offering a job to somebody in a restaurant in Worthing if they've been placed in a home in Sunderland.
That's a very good point.
Well, I'm really grateful to my right honourable friend for the points he makes. And yes, we will work with him and with others who are making business offers in order to provide people with the jobs and the support that they need. And I'm very grateful to him for the work that he's already done and continues to do to help the most vulnerable who are fleeing persecution.
Brendan O'Hara.
Deputy Speaker, I have been humbled by the response of the people of Argyll and Bute who have contacted me already to offer accommodation to fleeing Ukrainian refugees. Similarly, having met with the Chief Executive of the Council on Friday, I know that they too stand ready to play their part, as they did magnificently when the Syrian refugees found shelter in Argyll and Bute, having also fled Putin's bombs. But can they tell me, will the local authorities be allowed to be sponsors for refugees themselves under the terms of this scheme?
Well, I'm very grateful, and the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. Local authorities and people across Scotland, and the welcome that they showed to Syrians fleeing persecution and the willingness that they are showing to help Ukrainians fleeing persecution, it's great. And he's absolutely right. People in Argyll and in island communities have already done so. Well, what we're hoping to do with the Scottish Government is allow the Scottish Government to be a super sponsor and then to allow them to work with local authorities in Scotland. That's what's been put forward to us as the best way forward by Scottish Government ministers. It seems sensible to me. We just need to try to make it work.
Mark Harper.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I strongly welcome the scheme my right honourable friend set out, but can I urge him to make sure that any of the safeguarding and checking measures remain proportionate? As Conservatives, we generally believe people can make decisions for themselves and and I agree that with unaccompanied children, safeguarding is critical, but let's not get the state in the way of the generous response from the British people and make sure those checks are proportionate to the risk. Let the British people respond in the way that they already have.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. It's a very common sense perspective which I completely share.
Marcia de Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituency has a proud record of welcoming refugees. But of those families that will require settlement here, there will be some where there would be an adult with a disability or a child with a disability, and they will have very specific needs and require specific support. So can the Secretary of State confirm, because his statement didn't allude to any of the specialist support that will be available, will there be specialist support available, and will there be additional funding for them?
Very, very important point, and I know what a passionate and effective spokesperson she is for those living with disabilities, and absolutely, we will work with local government in order to make sure that the support is there for women, children and others fleeing persecution, many of whom will be living with disabilities and will need additional support.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement. I know Buckinghamshire Council stands ready to do all they can to support and give a warm welcome with good services to Ukrainian families coming to Buckinghamshire under this scheme. But to assist them with their planning, can the Secretary of State confirm whether funds made available to local authorities will just be for local authority services, or will councils have to have a dual function of commissioning services from the NHS, Academy Trust in schools, etc.?
Thank you. The funding that we will make available will cover general local authority costs. There will be an additional supplement for education for the early years for primary school and for secondary schools. But we are working with Martin Tech, great local council leader, and others in order to ensure that any specific additional support that may be required is tailored appropriately.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just some questions for clarification, Secretary of State. Charities like Refugees at Home arrange hosting of refugees following a visit from a referrer or a home visitor who assess the potential placement and liaise with potential hosts. Is that the role in the scheme that the Secretary of State envisages for charities like that? Because he mentioned churches and he mentioned charities and he mentioned community organisations. The third sector, I believe, is ready to help and has always stepped up, but it's not easy when they've already given such a lot during the pandemic. So would such charities be properly supported financially to help them expand the work they do quickly?
Yes, on the first point, can I say that Refugees at Home has done an amazing job in helping to support the existing sponsorship route, which, as colleagues across the House have pointed out, admirable as it is not appropriate in its own limited way for what we're doing now. And we've been talking to charities over the course of the last 10 days in order to make sure that we learn from them about what level of support may be required. And of course, if it's the case that there is more capacity building that is needed within the third sector, then we stand ready to do that. But we've been working with Reset Communities, Citizens UK, the Sanctuary Foundation, the Red Cross and others in order to make sure that we can support them.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I ask for an official point of contact with a very valuable resource, an organisation called the Council for At-Risk Academics, which has not only been rescuing scholars from dictatorial regimes since 1933, but which coordinates sponsorship from a whole network of universities. So the main danger is a disconnect between the work they can do and the new sponsorship organisation and admission organisation. Can we have an official point of contact for CARA?
Yes, I'm hugely grateful, and I was able to talk to a leading academic at Manchester University earlier today who's working in a very similar field. And I will make sure that my Right Honourable friend is put in touch with an appropriate official contact in my department. And I and Lord Harrington, either I or Lord Harrington, will be back in touch with my Right Honourable friend in the next 24 hours.
Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the media contribution yesterday and the statement this afternoon has spurred on optimistic aspiration for those in my constituency and across the United Kingdom who wish to help. Will the Secretary of State dedicate a hotline for parliamentarians like us who want to iron out the cracks for individuals to assist them and ensure, particularly in Northern Ireland, because we've heard of Wales and we've heard of Scotland and we know the political situation isn't as fertile as we would like it to be in Northern Ireland, that he is confident that schools, hospitals and housing will be made available, knowing, as he does, that they don't rest within local government.
No, absolutely, and 2 points. One, we know the political situation in Northern Ireland, but we did have an opportunity to talk to Jane Brady of the Northern Ireland Civil Service in order to make sure that Northern Ireland was fully looped into this approach, and both the Secretary of State and the Minister of State in the Northern Ireland Office are committed to doing everything to help. And it will be the case that Lord Harrington will be holding regular surgeries for members of Parliament from all parties who wish to help and mobilise local resource.
Siobhan Bailey.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the people of Stroud are extremely big-hearted and they want to help in as many ways as possible, so we really welcome this innovative scheme, which I understand is the first of its kind anywhere. This offer is, however, complex with many moving parts, and as my right honourable friend said, many refugees coming here will be mothers and women with children. So can he confirm that he's working with the DWP to make sure they're ready to assist with benefits and also childcare options, because we know many of them will want to work and the jobs are actually there? Thank you.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and the Secretary of State at DWP has been working with the team incredibly energetically to provide the basis of such support.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Deputy Speaker, and can I welcome the announcement from the Secretary of State today, and also say we're very grateful that Lord Harrington has already agreed to appear before the Home Affairs Select Committee on Wednesday to answer questions. But I just want to ask the Secretary of State about how assured he is about the visa requirement that is still in place for Ukrainians coming to this country, particularly, as the Home Secretary said, 90% of Ukrainians do not have a passport, so will have to go to the visa application centres, which have been beset with closure, not opening as often as we want them to, problems with the online systems going down, and many other problems. So how assured is the Secretary of State that they've struggled to actually deal with the family visa system for Ukraine people? How assured is he that this is going to work and be up and running soon?
Well, I'm really grateful to the chair of the Select Committee. The first thing is that Lord Harrington and I have been seeking to assure ourselves with our Home Office colleagues that the system that goes live from tomorrow, which allows passport holders, and actually quite rightly points out that is not every Ukrainian, to be able to rapidly online secure the PDF form to which I referred earlier, which will allow them ease of access, It's also the case, as she quite rightly points out, that there have been challenges. I won't go into all of the reasons now. She knows them very well with the operation of our visa application centres. But we have, as well as the new visa application centre in Arras in northern France, which my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, referred to last week, it's also the case that we've expanded opening hours in many visa application centres, and in particular Warsaw and Rzeszów in Poland, which, because of complicated Polish labour laws, were not open at the weekend beforehand, are now fully open, and we will continually update the House on the speed and the effectiveness with which visa application centres are processing applications.
John Lamont.
You very much welcome this important announcement. My constituents in the Scottish borders are desperate to help. I'm conscious there's a slightly different system in Scotland with the Scottish Government taking on the super sponsor position. So can the Minister reassure me that his officials in the Department will work with Scottish Borders Council and the Scottish Government to ensure that the system is seamless and those people wanting to help are provided with the help and families coming to this country are supported in every way possible?
We absolutely will, and the scheme that goes live this week, of course we're working with the Scottish Government, the scheme that goes live this week allows individuals anywhere in the United Kingdom to offer to act as a sponsor, and we've explained to the Scottish Government that we just want to crack on.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Britain and Ireland are both surrounded by water, neither of them are part of Schengen, and yet Ireland has taken 3 times the number of Ukrainian refugees that Britain's taken, despite having a population 13 times smaller. Why?
I'll never criticise the Irish Government.
Steve Bryan.
It is back, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's welcome, as is the expansion of the family scheme and the new sponsorship scheme, which my right honourable friend will know I was very impatient to see last week. Certainly the 1,700 people 1,700 of us who stood together in Winchester Cathedral on Saturday with prayers for Ukraine are very appreciative of this. The phased response, I think, is sensible. We can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We have to get this up and running. Is there a trigger or a timeline that my right honourable friend is working to for when the charities and the church groups can get into this, please?
As quickly as possible, not least because of the impassioned advocacy of my honourable friend.
Adam Kayser.
Many of my constituents across Airdrie and Shotts have expressed concerns to me that the UK is simply not doing enough to help Ukrainian refugees. But this government, of course, has formed. Whether that's refugees from Syria, Afghanistan or Ukraine, this Tory government has a tendency to draw red tape and shy away from its moral duty. But I have a specific question from today's statement. The Secretary of State in his answers kept referring to a warm welcome, and that, of course, was the name of the scheme designed to help Afghans. And we know that's not running as smoothly as it should be, and it's not necessarily a warm welcome. So what reassurances can he give the House that those aren't simply empty words, and those that are fleeing conflict will be genuinely welcomed?
Well, the good news is that her predecessor as Member of Parliament for Airdrie and Shotts, one of North Lanarkshire's finest, is now the Minister in the Scottish Government responsible for this. And I look forward to working with Neil Gray. Great man.
Alicia Cairns.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend, for his hard work to operationalise this system. It will provide a stable place of refuge rather than leaving them in hotels for too long. And I know the people of Rutland and Melton will join me in opening their hearts and their homes. But my ask is that we do all we can to ensure the most vulnerable come here, because that is not always those with contacts in the UK, and is most likely those trapped in the East. So please can you reassure me we will focus our efforts on those most in need?
The very good points from my honourable friend. My honourable friend, the member for Winchester, said we must make the perfect the enemy of the good. This scheme is not perfect, but what we are trying to do is to make sure that we can move as rapidly as possible. That's why named sponsors are being deployed. That means we can get people into homes. Again, we know that there is pressure on other accommodation, but we will be saying and doing more in every day that comes.
Debbie Abrams.
Deputy Speaker. I also welcome this scheme, and I know my constituents of Alderman Saddleworth have also been contacting me about what they can do in providing such a accommodation and so on. But can I gently remind the Secretary of State that there are still thousands of women activists, prosecutors, judges and others in Afghanistan who are still waiting to hear from the Afghan resettlement scheme. Will this type of scheme include them in a further rollout?
I thank the Honourable Leader, and I do appreciate the pressure on the Afghan resettlement scheme. When it was set up, it was going to be 20,000 people in this year, and then to be extended. We're working with our partners, and part of Lord Harrington's new responsibilities include ensuring not only that we get those who are currently in hotel accommodation into more settled accommodation, but also that we live up to our obligation to others.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I ask my right honourable friend if any consideration has been given to perhaps an advance office on the Ukraine-Polish border where people could go to and get advice and possibly some help to get to the UK, and possibly in combination with those extremely good NGOs, particularly the International Committee of the Red Cross and the UNHCR. Putting them all together, right on the border, would really help people coming through who don't know what to do.
Well, my honourable friend has a distinguished record when it comes to helping people in conflict areas, and of course I'll work with the Home Secretary in order to ensure that our resources on the ground are positioned appropriately.
Stuart Hosey.
I've spoken with senior councillors in Dundee over the last week, and the City Council remains open and willing to take and accommodate Ukrainian refugees. I also heard what the Minister said about working closely with the devolved administrations who wish to become super sponsors. Given Scotland and Wales, their governments, know far more than I do or the Minister does about their capacity and the capacity of their local governments, why does the Minister not simply allocate substantial numbers of Ukrainian refugees to Scotland and to Wales and let them get on with the job of providing sanctuary?
That's what we want to do.
Celine Saxby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to my right honourable friend for today's announcement. And can he confirm that if households are taking on a family or individual, register with a community support charity like the Pickwell Foundation in North Devon, who have a proven track record of providing warm, safe and sustainable welcomes to refugees, will they still receive the £350 per month?
Yes, the individuals will, yes.
Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Both of my local boroughs of Lambeth and Southwark stand ready and willing to welcome refugees from Ukraine, as they have welcomed refugees from many other parts of the world in the past. But it's really hard for them to do so if they are not formally a part of the government scheme. They will inevitably be playing catch-up on who is arriving in their area and what the support needs are. Local authorities know their communities best, and by cutting them out of a formal role in the scheme, the government will create avoidable problems and inefficiencies. Will the Secretary of State think again about the role of local authorities, the vital role that local authorities have to play in making sure that refugees have the fullest possible welcome in all of our communities across the UK?
I don't believe that we have cut local government out of the scheme, but of course I'm committed to working with Lambeth, Southwark and other local authorities in order to ensure that individuals who are placed with sponsors are provided with all of the support that local government is capable of providing, and that local government gets the resource needed from central government.
David Jones.
Deputy Speaker, there are many older people, particularly the widowed, who live alone in larger homes with plenty of spare rooms, who will be very keen to offer refuge to Ukrainian refugees. However, quite reasonably, they will need to be assured that it's entirely safe to do so. My right honourable friend says that the government is streamlining processes to security assess the status of Ukrainians arriving here. Could you give more details of what those processes are, please?
Yes, absolutely. It is the case that, as I mentioned earlier in the context of the Home Secretary's announcement last week, we want to make sure that anyone who applies, either using a Ukrainian passport or without it through a visa application centre, goes through basic security checks, because as we know, and it's a hard and difficult fact, there are malign actors in that part of Eastern Europe who may wish to abuse the scheme, so we have to balance security against other considerations, but the speed with which we can turn round applications now is a sign that we're prioritising compassion.
Patricia Gibson.
Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State earlier said that he hopes that many people will be ready to open their homes. But it seems that none of the 3,000 plus spare rooms offered to Afghan refugees by hosts across the UK have been used due to Home Office guidance. This doesn't inspire confidence, with regards to the Ukrainian scheme. So what steps will he take to ensure that the Ukrainian hosting and sponsorship scheme is more successful than the Afghan scheme was, and that Home Office guidance facilitates rather than blocks Ukrainian refugees settling here in the UK?
The Home Secretary and I will do everything possible in order to improve the operation of the scheme in line with the points that my honourable friend makes.
Faye Jones.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I commend my right honourable friend for the urgency he has brought to this issue? But can I press him to go faster still? Hay, Brecon and Talga Sanctuary for Refugees in my constituency has already done a phenomenal amount of work, but they stand ready to offer homes to people in Ukraine who don't know anyone in this country. Likewise, my many tourism and hospitality businesses. Can I ask him to direct his officials to go even faster on phase 2 of the scheme so that we can get this rolled out as quickly as possible?
We absolutely will, and we will make sure, and I recognise that there are already individuals who will be making offers, but in the conversations that I had with NGOs and others today, they will be doing their very best for anyone who is willing to allow a match to be made. And one of the things that's striking is the way in which charities and civil society organisations can be much faster and more nimble, even than the best government department, in bringing people together.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Following a really successful rally yesterday where the people of Newport West and surrounding areas demonstrated their wish to help house Ukrainian refugees, can the Secretary of State confirm that data about arrivals via this new route will be shared with councils? Because after all, access to this data by councils would help ensure children's health and education needs are met quickly.
Well, the Honourable Lady makes a very important point. It is critical that we do ensure that data is shared in a timely fashion. Absolutely.
Shailesh Vara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement made by my right honourable friend, and of course we all recognise that with time the people will be able to register for services from the NHS. However, there will be some people who need urgent medical treatment. Would he kindly ensure that he liaises with his counterpart, the Secretary of State for Health, to ensure that those who do need urgent health do get it, even though they may not have an NHS number?
My right honourable friend makes a very important point, and I have to say that the Secretary of State for Health has moved with amazing speed in order to provide support to some of the most vulnerable. I know the Secretary of State for Health was talking to the Ukrainian ambassador earlier today about what more the NHS might be able to do, and we will absolutely act in that spirit.
Alan Dorrance.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Good afternoon. Madam Deputy Speaker, has the United Kingdom Government set a cap, either actual or notional, on how many refugees we will take from Ukraine? And if so, how was that, or how will it be decided?
We'll do everything possible to make sure that the Scottish Government is satisfied.
Dr Ben Spencer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome the announcement from my right honourable friend today. Going back into safeguarding of vulnerable refugees, I listened very carefully to what he said about checks on historical and ongoing checks in terms of safety. Who will do the ongoing checks in terms of refugee safety?
Local government, who are experts in safeguarding.
Beth Winter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, said this weekend that visas shouldn't be necessary, as they're not necessary in the European Union. And indeed, he, along with his Scottish counterpart, has called on UK Government to waive visa requirements. This morning, the Chief Executive of the Welsh Refugee Council has described the scheme as not a humanitarian response, particularly when compared to other European countries who have accepted hundreds of thousands of people. And she describes the scheme as quite disheartening, indeed shocking, quite frankly. So will the Secretary of State look again at this heartless visa requirement scheme, which is so out of touch with the people of Britain and indeed the devolved nations, and please put people first instead?
Well, I'm sorry that she feels as she does. I should say that when I was talking to representatives of the Refugee Council earlier, one of the representatives said, as we unveiled the scheme, that they took their hat off to the government because they were so pleased with what we've done. Now, they want us to go further, and as I acknowledged earlier, the scheme is not perfect, but we have to balance speed with breadth, with comprehensiveness, with safety, with security, and with other considerations. But I'm grateful for her question, because I can update the House to say that since the website went live less than an hour ago, 1,500 people have already registered through the scheme in order to provide support.
Simon Jupp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend on behalf of East Devon for this Homes for Ukraine scheme. I've already received countless offers of accommodation from our generous towns and villages in East Devon. Could my right honourable friend, though, outline the safeguarding measures in place for both sponsors and refugees?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and he's right. First of all, we need to have a light touch approach, which means that individuals who come forward can be, we can be certain that they don't have any record of criminality. Then, subsequent to that, local government, including the excellent council in East Devon, can visit in order to ensure that accommodation is right. And then the checks that we're placing on people coming into the country, as we touched on earlier, are there in order to ensure that a very small, tiny minority of bad actors, but some of whom can be particularly exploitative and malignant, are kept out, so that we can ensure that the scheme works for those who genuinely need it.
Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I press the Secretary of State again on the question that my honourable friend asked? Is there going to be a cap on the number of Ukrainians allowed into the UK? And can I also say, if my constituents register today for that scheme, how quickly can they expect to have Ukrainians in their house?
Well, first of all, there's no cap overall on the number of people who can benefit. Secondly, the Scottish Government, as I mentioned earlier, has suggested that they could act as a super sponsor for 3,000, and we're working with them. And then on the particular point, if one of our constituents registers today, that means they can be updated. Come this Friday, it could be the case that they and a named Ukrainian can complete that form. As soon as that form is completed, there'll then be a turnaround in order to make sure that the security checks on both sides are safe, and that should mean, God willing, that there can be Ukrainians coming to Glasgow in just over a week's time.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Luton welcomes refugees, and we stepped up to welcome many Afghan refugees, as well as our community now stepping up to support our Ukrainian residents and refugees. However, we still have far too many families of the Afghan refugees who are in hotels still in Luton, and there is a great deal of pressure on our housing system. So can I ask the Secretary of State what plans and measures are in place to support families moving into longer-term housing, and would there be consideration of the £350 a month scheme for other refugees, which might be more culturally appropriate?
At least two very important points there. On the first, of course we need to move faster to move people from hotel accommodation into more suitable long-term accommodation. But there are constraints. I'm not criticising anyone, it's just there are constraints in Luton and elsewhere. And that's why we need to think about how we can find and indeed secure more suitable accommodation. We've done amazing work. My honourable friend has done amazing work in making sure that homeless people, some of whom were originally from Eastern Europe, are off the streets and in secure and safe accommodation, but more must be done. On the £350 payment, it's been designed to support people who are offering up their own homes, but let's see how it goes and let's see what more we can do in the future.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Bryce Cunningham of Mossgiel Farm in my constituency has already done a fantastic job organising aid out to Apollo's charity. He's also interested in being a sponsor and providing employment for Ukrainian refugees, but he doesn't have the physical accommodation to put them up. So would the £350 a month housing allowance, would he be able to use that to, say, come into a rental agreement with the local authority? And would the Secretary of State also reconsider allowing local authorities and community bodies to be able to access that £350 a month, so that we do provide as much help as possible for as many refugees?
Without knowing all of the details of the honourable gentleman's constituent, it does seem to me that what he wants to do, the constituent that is wholly admirable, and it is something that we should facilitate. But I'll ask my team to be in touch with him and with East Ayrshire Council in order to make sure that they can deliver in the way required.
Stephen Farry.
Madam Deputy Speaker, could I press the Secretary of State further on the situation regarding Northern Ireland? Maybe ask him to clarify, for example, does the registration work at UK level or local level, the matching at the UK level, the vetting, and how do Northern Ireland departments access resources? Will it be a barter consequential, or will they apply for a grant from the UK government?
On the first point, I believe, unless told otherwise, unless there is any barrier otherwise, by which I mean technical barrier, not legal barrier, that any UK citizen anywhere in the United Kingdom can act as a sponsor. And on the second point, we're discussing with the devolved administrations how we can provide the additional support, because if we were to restrict it simply to a bonnet consequential, and we found, as it happens, that in Northern Ireland or in Scotland or in Wales there were many more sponsors than in other parts of the United Kingdom, then that wouldn't be fair on those individuals. So we want to take a flexible approach.
Thank you. I thank the Secretary of State for thoroughly answering a large number of important questions. We now come to the programme motion for the Dissolution and Calling of Parliament Bill. It's programme number 2, to be moved formally. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. So the clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Dissolution and Calling of Parliament Bill. Consideration of Lord's amendments.
No, absolutely not. I call the Minister to move the motion to disagree with Lord's Amendment 1. Michael Ellis.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I beg to move that this House disagrees with Lord's Amendment number 1. This bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, has now had its passage through the other place, where it was carefully scrutinised. However, the bill was amended in only one respect, and that was to seek to retain a role for this Honourable House over dissolution. The amendment from the Lords provided that the Prime Minister could only request the sovereign exercise the revived prerogative powers to dissolve and call Parliament when this House agrees a motion. And the motion would have been that this present Parliament be dissolved. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this amendment would, of course, create an untested hybrid system, imposing statutory arrangements on top of the prerogative system that existed prior to the 2011 Act. And these statutory constraints would undermine the flexibility that characterises for generations the pre-2011 arrangements, which of course the government wants to reinstate. And so, with respect, the government firmly disagrees with the amendment. In fact, the government, in a moment if I may, I'll just say this, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government and the opposition both committed in their manifestos, no less, to repeal the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. And this amendment, by their Lordships' House, would repeal the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, but only to retain one of its fundamental flaws. That is not our wish, it is not our intention, and it is not the commitment that we made to the electorate.
Say to the Minister that I'm hugely relieved to hear him say that. I have stood in every election since 1997, and only when we saw the chaos caused by a government that did not want to continue and an opposition that did not want to have the chance to face an election can we see how dreadful that old system was, and we need to get rid of it, bag and baggage.
I agree with the Right Honourable Gentleman, and of course there's a good reason why that Parliament, the 17 to 19 Parliament, is referred to as the zombie Parliament, and he's quite right, of course. And I would like to remind the House of the commitments that both parties made in 2019. On our side, we committed, of course, to repealing the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, yes.
And would the Minister confirm that if we dismiss this Lord's amendment today, the courts will not have a role in fixing elections? Because surely that is a matter for us, answerable to the electors.
He's quite right that, of course, it is not productive, and in fact it wouldn't be in the interests of the judiciary themselves, I would submit to this House, for the courts to have such a role. So not only did we commit to repealing the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, as it had led to paralysis at a time the country needed decisive action, in a similar vein, the party opposite, the manifesto of the party opposite, said that the 2011 Act stifled democracy, quote, and propped up weak government, quote. So a vote in the Commons could create paralysis in a number of contexts, including minority governments, coalition governments, or where our parties, Parliament, or even the nation at some point in the future were divided. So as a majority on the Joint Committee on the Fixed Term Parliaments Act noted, a Commons vote would only have a practical effect were we in a situation where Parliament was gridlocked. But the problem with that is, where the government of that day had a comfortable majority, a vote would be unlikely to make any difference. It would have no meaningful effect, beyond causing, of course, unnecessary delay and expense. However, when Parliament is gridlocked, a vote could mean denying an election to a government that was unable to function effectively, and we witnessed the consequences of a vote painfully in 2019. And let us not repeat that mistake by devising a system where those events could happen again. The amendment is, therefore, with the greatest possible respect, without merit.
Given way, and he mentioned the situation where there's a minority government. What would happen in the situation where a Prime Minister of a minority government wished to call a general election, but there was the possibility of forming an alternative government? Would he be able to dissolve Parliament by prerogative in those circumstances, or would another person be given an opportunity to form a government and a majority in the House of Commons?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't want to get into hypotheticals, but what I will say is this. That the pre-2011 position worked extremely well. And there is a reason why it worked well, and it was proven to have functioned correctly. So what we seek to do is to go back to a proven, tried and tested system which works in a whole variety of different circumstances, not every one of which can be easily expostulated. I'll give way.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. And does he share my disbelief at some of the opposition to the Minister's current position in recalling the chaos that led to the last general election and the frustration by the public where Parliament seemed to lose, in many people's eyes, the respect of the population?
Good constitutional practice involves protecting the integrity of the legislature, the executive and the judiciary. And in our view, the proposals do that. This amendment would not do that. And so I agree with what my right honourable friend says. And I think, yes, I'll give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. I sat on the joint committee on which reviewed this Act, and we spent very long, productive and interesting hours looking at it. But would you agree with me that it is really unproductive to look at our future arrangements in the context of what happened in 2019, just as it is to look at them in the context of what happened in 2010, and that the beauty of our system must be that our constitution must be allowed to flex. Those were particularly unique circumstances in 2019, and we shouldn't let them affect what happens going forward.
She is completely right, and in fact, it is very difficult. It is very difficult to, of course, expostulate on all the different scenarios that may occur in the future, and so it's best to avoid that. But we know what had worked well, and that is the status quo ante the 2011 Act. I'll just make a little progress, if I may, because I'm conscious of the time. Now, as I say, we've experienced the consequences of a statutory scheme, and we know what happened in 2019, but this amendment is also dangerously silent on critical questions of implementation, and it is likely to have undesirable consequences for our constitutional system. For example, it is likely to have negative consequences for the fundamental conventions on confidence. The privilege, Madam Deputy Speaker, to request that the sovereign exercise the dissolution prerogative is an executive function enjoyed by virtue of the ability of the government to command the confidence of the Commons. That's the alpha and omega of everything, and this should not be unduly constrained by any sort of prescriptive parliamentary process
which would be disruptive and unhelpful when expediency is essential. I'll give way.
On that point, I thank the Minister for giving way. He's just responded to the Honourable Member for Thurrock, saying that he